Thank you, brother, for the reading. It's an interesting passage. What do you make of that? The shrewd steward, some versions call it, or the unjust steward? Both. What do you make of that? We'll come back to that in just a moment. About 10 or 15 years ago, probably, I was here and someone gave me a golf disc. We were out here playing and they said, "Come on, Warren, let's play." I played with a borrowed disc, and that week he went into Bozeman and bought me a disc and gave it to me. That was 10, maybe 15 years ago. Was it anybody here? Do you remember? I do not remember who the brother was, where he's from. And I thought, I don't know anything about Frisbee golf other than I'd seen it here. We threw it into some trees. I didn't know much about it. Went back, had nothing to do with it until this spring, cleaning out a box in the garage, I found that Frisbee disc. So then I go to Red River Family Encampment, and there's a young man there who says, "Come on, Warren, let's go play Frisbee golf." I said, "Frisbee golf? I've heard of that. I played it a time or two up in Montana, in fact. But no, I don't think so." And he said, "Come on, I really don't want to play alone." And I said, "You're 22, I'm 58, it's hot. I want to go rest in the cabin after teaching classes." He says, "Well, I'm going to go down there and be throwing them around with some folks from my family people from my family that are not actually going to be playing. So if you decide you want to play, come on down." Well, he texted me in a few minutes and said, "I'm waiting." So I went down there, and Leonard reintroduced me to Frisbee golf, and it was a blast. So I said, "I've got a disc at home." And I go home and I find it and I buy a couple more and I make a set and brought some up here. And lo and behold, there are some good Frisbee golf players here. Brett, Matthew, John, there may be some others of you. It's fun, isn't it? It's just fun being at this camp, isn't it? Whether it's Frisbee golf, I've never played these bouncy ball games here. My kids have. They look like fun. The basketball, volleyball. What else do you do here? Hiking. I like walking this road up here with a camera and taking pictures. It's just fun to be here. I love it every chance I get to come. And this is a good group. Thank you for accepting my family and me into it, and our friends from Ulysses that are here for the first time. There's some other folks that are here from the first time. Who are first timers this year to this camp? Yes. Okay, yeah, for this week. Who are first timers here for this? Okay, there's a good number of us. 20% maybe? And how do you like it? It is wonderful, isn't it? How many of you will come back if you get a chance? I will. In fact, we're planning on it next year. Different week, but we're coming back to this camp. Each camp has a little different, or each week a little different flavor. There's different people. They've been together, some for 15 years, and they're family. And this is a family. This is like a church group right here. And you really are. This is the church this week. The church is God's people assembled, and that's what we are here. And thank you for being a part of that and making it a special week for me and I know for many other people here. Bless you. The unjust steward. And what do you make of the fact, and Bill, thank you for the reading, what do you make of the fact that at the end he is commended for what he has done? When he did something that we teach our parents you don't do. I wanted to show you that first. Isn't that pretty cool? I didn't take that on the way up here, but I took that in Colorado, and I put it on the slide just so you could see it. It is beautiful. Not only is that beautiful, they taste good. And this is Red River Family Encampment, just to make you aware of it, not to take you from this encampment at all. This is a totally different kind of encampment. There's 1,800 people. It's not a small group like this where you get to know each other well, the same people over and over for many years. This is 1,800 people. You stay all over the town and you meet in a big tent. But just to show you, this is for the students here and for you parents who are trying to tell your children, language matters, words matter. Okay, here's a lot of dear, sweet people at Red River Family Encampment. Or there's a lot of dear, sweet people that are at the encampment. I just couldn't resist that. And since it's dear and we have them around here, but the spelling does make a difference. The unjust steward. What's a modern example? I think of Eva Crutain in World War II. She was a German and she lived in the eastern section. Russians were coming through. They were killing any of the men that they found or taking them into captivity for slave labor. And the women, they were not treating very well at all. And many of the little children were being left abandoned. Eva knew what was coming, so she got on a boat and she took the route through the sea to get back into Germany proper. Once there, so many of the houses were destroyed, the cities destroyed, there were not enough places for people to live. The German government ordered that if you have a house and someone comes to your house needing a place to stay, by order of the German government, you have to take these people in. So there could be 3 and 4 families living in the same house that don't know each other. And it didn't always go very well. It wasn't always very smooth. You think about 4 or 5 families you don't know just knocking on your door saying, "We're here!" And you've got to let them in. And the reason they did it, there was no place for all these people to go. There were no jobs. The infrastructure totally destroyed. Eva has a little baby. So what she does for her 2-year-old to have enough to eat is she will find anything she can that's even illegal to sell, and she'll black market it. And then she'll take that money and she'll invest it in something else and black market that item. And then she'll take that and go buy some eggs that a farmer down the road has that hasn't been attacked yet. And she'll bring those eggs back and feed her baby. And she does a number of illegal things. But when you're done with the book, you think, I don't blame Eva Crutain for doing that. Even though what she did was illegal and some of it was wrong, you understand why she did it, because of the value of her daughter's life. But it doesn't make it right. And I'm not saying that's a comparable story exactly to the story of the unjust steward, but I remember being done with that book thinking, if that was my wife with our child or children, I would want her to do that so they could stay alive. The unjust steward. How do you interpret or explain a biblical story that praises someone that by all accounts looks like a bit of a scoundrel? You know this story, right? This man has been fired because he's not been a good steward. A steward is someone who works for another, manages their affairs, their money, their holdings, their property, their land, their cattle. And this steward has been squandering or losing money, and the master says, "You're fired." And now what this man says is, wow, what do I do now? I can't go out and work. I'm either too old or too weak. I'm not going to beg. I know what I'll do. And he devises this scheme whereby he's going to get himself in good with someone else. "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management," the master says, "because you cannot be my manager any longer." And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job, people will welcome me into their houses." When the master says, "Give an accounting," the servant stays silent, indicating, number one, he's guilty. And he's thinking to himself, whoa, I'm guilty. That's why I've got nothing to say. Any of you kids have your parents ask you, why did you do that? And you just stand there looking, hoping that they'll interpret your silence as being, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't know why my brother or sister has that stuff all over them. And even though I'm the only other person in the house, why would you think that I did it? Silence implies guilt. Number two, the servant knows that the master knows that I am guilty. And number three, the master expects obedience. And this servant has not been obedient, and he has been caught. And he knows that offering excuses won't get his job back, because this master is a precise person. So the steward's in crisis now. This servant is in crisis. But he has learned something about the master, that the master is a merciful, gracious boss. He's going to play on that. He calls in the renters. The master owns the property. The steward manages the property. They rent out the property to other people who work the land. And they call these people in who probably make their payment for the land, the use of the land, with stuff that they raise. Olive oil, for example, grapes, whatever it is, they bring a certain portion into the master, and that's what they pay the master with. Well, the steward knows who all of them are because they work for the master. Here they're called debtors, And it could be that they're in debt to the master for the use of the land. They could also be called renters or farmers on the land that the master owns. The steward calls them in and says, how much do you owe my master for the use of your land? Well, I owe 800 gallons of olive oil. The other one says, 1,000 bushels of wheat. And the steward says, take your bill, and in one case, reduce it by 20%. In the other case, reduce it by 50%. How would you like your house payment reduced this year by 50%? How many of you would accept even 20%? Yeah. So when these renters come in and the steward says, hey, listen, guys, go ahead and slash your bill. What do you think they say? Oh man, I don't know. We agreed to pay this much. I think I'll just go ahead and pay the full amount. No. If you've ever lived on the farm, you know how tough it is. What do they hope for? 1 out of 5 years to be good, to make up for the other 4, something like that? With weather, with varmints, with the economy, with all kinds of things working against the farmer. When they have a year like this where they're going to get a break, guess what they say? Thank you. And what do you think they think about this steward? He is the greatest guy on earth. They love him. But hasn't he been fired? Hasn't the steward been fired? Does he have the authority to tell these other people to reduce their bill? Not only does he not have the authority to do it, does he have the right to do it? It's not his property. He's merely the manager of it. And his job as a steward in charge of the farming operations is to get as much income from the renters as he can in olive oil, in wheat, in corn, in grapes, whatever it is. His job to the various farmers working the land is to get whatever he can for his boss, not to reduce the amount. He's been fired. He doesn't have authority. Furthermore, he doesn't have the right, even if he was still employed. Wouldn't the debtors be a little bit suspicious? Wouldn't the debtors be a little kind of questioning, why are you calling us in here, telling us to reduce our debt by 50%? Wouldn't they be a little, why are you doing this? And if they did ask, what do you think the steward says? Now, we don't know the whole story because Jesus is drawing from a cultural situation that is different in some respects from ours. But we do have owners of land today. We do have landlords who operate their land for them. We have some of that the same. But there are some things that are different. And I think what probably happens when the people get suspicious and say, Mr. Steward, do you really have right to do this with your master's property and with the debt we owe? And what I imagine the steward says is something like this. Oh, you mean Mr. Simpson? The boss, the owner? Man, I went to him the other day and I said, boss, these folks out here, the farmers, they are struggling this year. Remember we had the drought earlier in the spring? And then we had those crickets came through and just ate everything up. They're struggling just to make it. Boss, what do you think that we offer them to reduce what they owe? And you know what? They're going to love you and me. They're going to love us, brother. And guess what? They're going to be renting from us for the rest of their lives. You'll never have to worry about a vacant piece of farmland again. So I went to the boss and I told him that, and the boss said, Steward, you have a good idea. You go call those men in and tell them it was your idea even, and you go ahead and reduce their bill. And then what did the farmers say? Oh man, you are the best landlord ever, and the master of this farm is the best master we could ever work for. Thank you, brother. We are so excited. You imagine something like that happened? Because remember, this is a small farming community. How many of you have grown up in a farming community? How many of the farmers in that county know who each other is, even if they live on the far ends of the county? How many of the farmers know many of the farmers in the surrounding counties? They know who's growing what kind of wheat. They know who's growing what kind of corn. They know who has a new John Deere tractor. They know who has an old one to sell. They know who has a broken down one that they're parting out. They know whose kids are going to college. They know which ones have teenage daughters that maybe their teenage sons will meet because they're sweet girls. They are in a farming community where oftentimes they have to work together because of weather and floods and snowstorms that can harm their land. And sometimes they have to come together in crisis situation to help each other. And they meet on these boards, and they go to Farm Bureau meetings, and they send their kids to the same school, and they know who each other is, and they know how tough it is to make it. And when someone says, reduce it by 20%, the boss says so, we know it's tough, they cry and they say, thank you, brother. It really has been tough. And now this puts the master in crisis, because he goes to the local restaurant to eat with his wife. And the guy raising the wheat comes in and says, Mr. Simpson, thank you. I love you so much. We can shake hands if you want. I feel awkward standing here. You are the best landlord I have ever had. I will never go to another landlord. I will stay with you the rest of my life. Well, great. What is it I did? You know, you reduced my wheat by 20%. That. Well, don't mention it. Honey, do you know anything about this? I sure don't. That steward, wait till I get my hands on him. And then he's sitting there eating, and the other guy comes in, and he says, I owe you 1,000 barrels of olive oil, but you told the steward to reduce mine by 50%. Thank you, Mr. Landlord. I love you. I will never go to any other farmer. I'm committed to you for life. And he sits there eating, and he's thinking, what has this steward done to me? So what does he do now? See, he's in a crisis mode. He's got two options. Number one, he can sit there after he's being praised as being the greatest man in the county. He can say, you're wrong. I'm really a jerk. You owe the full amount. That steward of mine, I fired him, and he has no right to do that. So you get your lazy self back out there and you make up those other 500 bushels. Is that what he does? Or does he smile and say, thank you. Thank you very much. You bet. We aim to please. Glad you're happy. They better get those barrels in that they owe me. I'm not taking any less. See, he's in a crisis situation now. But he realizes to save face in the Palestinian community, which then and now was so critically important. We talked about that last night. To save face, he has to smile and say, you're welcome. Hope it helps. In verse 8, Jesus says, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. He goes home from the restaurant after being greeted by all these enthusiastic people. And even others who don't work for him in the community, they hear about it because farmers talk to each other about the good breaks they get. And he's walking down the road with his wife, and the other farmers say, Brother Simpson, what you did for those men, I'll tell you what, it's been tough out there this year. You are the best. Thank you. His esteem goes up in the community like this. What does he do? Jesus said, this servant acted wisely. And there's two key words in this. One is wisdom or clever. It's the word for survival. In Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 24, this is a word for wisdom used in reference to survival. Proverbs 30 and verse 24. 4 things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. This is the wise of the steward in Luke. Ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food for the summer. Conies are creatures of little power, yet they make their home in the crags. Locusts have no king, yet they advance together in the ranks. And a lizard can be caught with the hand, yet is found in the palaces of kings. These are little creatures that do amazing things to survive and find themselves in places of honor like the king's mansion. And all they are is a little scrawny lizard. We're human beings and we can't get in the king's mansion, but a little lizard can. And Jesus says the steward is wise like that little lizard. The second word is praise. Jesus praises this steward. We sang a song tonight. The first song that Matthew led for us was about praising God. That's what this parable is about. And here's why I think it's that meaning. The parable means, in a parable, the meaning lies outside the parable. With a parable, the meaning lies outside the parable. That's why, toward the end of Matthew, where many of the parables are pointing to the end of time, when Jesus tells the parables about the talents and the Pharisees realize that the parable is about them, It's not about the talents. It is about them. They get angry. They get angry because they know the parable is not about the parable. It is about them. The parable points to something else of deeper meaning, of bigger meaning. So in this case, the parable is a story with the meaning that lies outside of it. The parable points to something else. And if the master in this story is God, if the master is the one who owns the property and the steward is the one who says, my master's gracious, he says, go ahead and reduce your bill by 20%. Go ahead and reduce your bill by 50%. You watch, my master is gracious. When you see him at the restaurant and you go up and you say, thank you for what you and your servant have done, your steward have done, you are the greatest. He's just going to smile real big because my master is good. And the master is God. And what does this story tell us about God? That like this master who was cheated by his own servant, but recognized a cleverness for survival, and he commended him. And he has a big enough heart that he could extend the grace to the servants who worked the field and the servant who made the deals. He has a heart and a forgiveness and a grace that doesn't make sense. It's beyond what makes sense to us. We would want to get mad. We would want to say, steward, I'm taking you to court, and he would deserve it. We would want to say, renters, we made an agreement. You're paying the full amount. The steward is not letting you off the hook. But this master is gracious, and he says to the steward, you're pretty smart. Well done. Like it? No, I don't like it. I'm losing money on the deal, but well done. A wonderful story of survival. And this tells us something about our God. Do you know any stories in the Bible of God's grace and forgiveness that just doesn't make sense? It goes beyond making sense. Have you heard of a story of David and Bathsheba? Are there details in that story that just don't make sense that you would let a man like that live? David and Bathsheba. When another man, all he did was stick out his hand to steady the ark and he got struck. What is it about David that he would spare David? Sometimes the grace of God just doesn't make sense. It's almost like the Spirit that blows where it will, right? And we have no control over it. What about David? Or rather, what about Saul, who becomes Paul? Who's breathing out murderous threats against the church and even standing there helping kill early Christians, holding their coats, then himself going out and arresting them and bringing them in. And yet God says, look at that guy over there. Look at that. He is killing my people. He's killing the people accepting the name of my son. He will make a great preacher. Who does that? Who does that? I don't. I see people doing that and I say, I'm not going to Indonesia. They kill Christians there. I'm not going to Saudi Arabia. They throw Christians in jail there. God looks at him and says, they're killing Christians in Indonesia. The guy that just pulled the trigger, he's my next deacon in charge of benevolence. It doesn't make sense. Neither the story nor the God we serve, the level of grace he has. And how about you and me? How many of you have made decisions? How many of us have made decisions at some point in our life that we should just be dead? We did something that was very, very wrong, for which we should be punished, or we did something that was very, very dangerous, for which we had no right to ask to survive. Drinking too much, driving too fast, icy roads. How is it that God has spared us to be here? In his book, In the Problem of Evil, M. Scott Peck says, people wonder, are there miracles today? And people question, how come my child or my friend was killed in that accident? He said, as I have studied people and I've studied the problem of evil and I've looked at the grace of God, I marvel that there aren't so many more of us that aren't killed on a regular basis. I've started to ask, why haven't I been killed because of some of the things that I've done? And then I sit back and I marvel at the grace and the mercy of our God. Because we serve a God who doesn't make sense. He dispenses grace like we dispense, just throwing it out. Like in the story of the parable of the farmer with the seeds. He just goes out and he just throws the seeds. He throws the seeds. He goes out and he throws mercy and he throws grace. That doesn't mean he doesn't require us to change, to repent, to seek his forgiveness, to be washed in the name of his Son, and to wear the name of... It doesn't mean he doesn't ask us to do that. Of course he does. Even Paul himself had to change, right? Sure, he had to repent. He had to be baptized. But the fact that there was even room for him in the kingdom... This story uses a Jewish principle called val kahomer, which is how much more. The how much more principle. If a master could forgive a servant who pulled this unprincipled deal with the renters, and the master forgive him and commend him, how much more can our God accept us for our meager service we offer, love us in spite of it, and commend us? How much more? Val kahomer. And what this parable is supposed to do for us, I think, is at the end make us go, oh my. It is not my goodness. It is not my work. It is not my position. It is not my place. It is not my standing. It is not my study. It is not my knowledge. It is simply and completely and totally the grace of God that gives any meaning and any purpose to me whatsoever. Thank you, Lord, and praise your name. Amen. The parable of the unjust steward is the story of God's favor toward you and me.